Hello, I'm James Cridland, the radio futurologist, and every couple of weeks I write a newsletter all about the future of radio and international radio trends and all of that. You can get it at james.crid.land, which is a website address, james.crid.land, and that would be lovely if you got it. But this is the podcast version where I read it to you because you're too lazy to read it for yourself, possibly. Anyway, this is for May the 17th, 2023, and it's all about India and the live item tag and way too much about the BBC. The Indian government, first of all, has mandated that mobile phones include FM tuners. They're asking manufacturers not to disable an existing FM radio feature if one exists, and also asking if FM radio can be added to phones if it's not already there. It is, though, just an advisory. So it's got no legal weight, and the Register notes that it says mobile phones, not smartphones. About 20% of India still uses feature phones, and if you have a look at the price of these feature phones, you can buy a phone with a year's free calls for about $19 in US money, so probably not worth holding your breath that Apple will add an FM radio tuner in iPhone anytime soon. Something interesting is happening in podcasting, and it involves radio. First, Spotify has been promoting Broadcast to Podcast, a new feature now offered by Megaphone that turns radio shows into podcasts at the press of a few buttons, or even automatically. And not to be outdone, Triton Digital's Omni Studio has been reminding people that they've offered that feature forever as well. And you can hear interviews with both Spotify and Omni Studio in this week's Pod News Weekly Review. You'll find that linked from the show notes and my newsletter at james.crid.land. But also, other clever people have been working on something called the Live Item Tag, a new extension to the RSS feed. So here's how it works if you're a listener. You subscribe to your favourite radio show's podcast in your podcast player. You get the podcasts as you normally would, but because this podcast also uses the Live Item Tag, your app is able to notify you when the show goes live on the radio. So the app can play the stream directly, letting you tune in and listen, or you can even set it up to open your radio app if you want it to do that too. Now, the live item tag contains a time that the show should go live, but it also realizes that not every show starts on a clock start. So it includes triggering too, to signal when the show really goes live. So if you're 10 minutes late for some reason, then that's fine. I think the last time they did tests on the triggering, it took about 20 seconds to get to every single podcast app out there, which is pretty impressive. Anyway, currently the live item tag is supported by 3 podcast apps: Podverse, Podcast Addict, which is a pretty big one, and Curiocaster. But it's relatively simple to add this support for this tag, and other podcast apps are beginning to add it. I believe that Fountain is going to be launching it anytime soon as well. And there are a few shows that are lit and live, as they call them, most notably Podcasting 2.0, which is on Friday evenings in the UK, the New Media Show, which I think airs Wednesday afternoons US time, and No Agenda also uses it, I gather, as well. And since it can be added to any podcast feed without breaking anything, it might be worth looking into for radio stations. A notification to listen seems a good thing. BBC News PR, based in London, seemed delighted at the recent silver placing of BBC Radio 4's Today Show, based in London. Of course, it's not called the Today Show, it's just called Today, but you know the one that I mean. Anyway, it tweeted out a photograph and said, "Well done, BBC Radio 4 Today, clap, clap, clap," from the BBC. Except Radio 4 got silver and Radio 5 Live got gold, which is another BBC channel, and in fact it is the News and Sport channel. So after quite a few BBC types wondered whether the gold from news station BBC Radio 5 Live was surely rather more worthy of congratulation, the team tweeted, "And of course congratulations to 5 Live, we don't PR them from this account." So this tweet isn't a snub or an omission, but of course we're proud of all of the BBC family. And then they promptly deleted both of those tweets, which, by the way, is against BBC editorial policy. The back of the BBC ID card still says something about One BBC. But as ever, internal fiefdoms drive nonsense like this. Or perhaps it's because Radio 5 Live is in Salford and not in London, as they were. Now let's move on to BBC Local Radio. This gets a bit personal in a minute, but their changes seem horrible to watch from overseas. David Lloyd has written about the funeral for BBC Local Radio, calling it little short of scandalous. He listens to a poor interview as a senior manager tries to defend the cuts on the runner-up award-winning BBC Radio 4 Today programme. And he listens to another interview on feedback. He looks at how the BBC can execute its new local radio plan and wonders rightly whether or where Ofcom is with all of this. And he looks at the poor online offerings currently being presented as an alternative. You'll find all of those links in my show notes and in the newsletter at james.crid.land. But it seems that the incompetence isn't just in the plans, but in the awful, dreadful execution by the BBC's HR teams and by management. And here comes a personal side note. I should probably declare an interest here because I was the subject of constructive dismissal at the BBC in 2009. I was bullied and I was obstructed while doing my job. I was set up to fail, and I was forced into resigning from a corporation I was initially so proud to work for. After I found some, my lawyers threatened the BBC with legal action, and rather than me taking them to court, the BBC settled for a decent financial sum, along with a gagging order that I wasn't allowed to tell anyone about their awful HR department. Well, it's 14 years later, so I don't suppose anyone there will care if I now willingly break the terms of that agreement. I've never worked for any company with a worse disregard for their people than the BBC, and it left me in a pretty poor state for some years after. So with that in mind, Nicky Horn has been collecting some examples of the BBC's awful way of treating their people in BBC Local Radio, likening it to Hunger Games treatment. Some examples are, I'll read some of these tweets out, some staff at one radio station have been told, when we said last week that all journalists were now not at risk, sorry, that was a mistake, and you're still at risk at this station. Incompetence meets cruelty, Nicky adds. Nicky also says, I'm told by successful presenters in BBC Local Radio that even if you're successful, your show will be under constant review and you could be moved off it at any point, so presenters will go on air daily in constant fear for their job. The BBC Careers Hub website was shut in mid-April. They're shutting down the BBC's career site and deleting our profiles while we're all looking for new work. You couldn't make this up. Another person writes, we were given 60 seconds to save our career and had to treat it like a speed date. We were timed with a stopwatch but not shown the clock. It all felt so degrading. I was timed as 2 seconds out. It's honestly been the worst 6 months of my career. Another says, I used to work in independent local radio for GWR and Capital and GCAP and have never known a situation that's been so badly handled by so many supposedly experienced managers who've managed to demonstrate a complete lack of management skill. Another, I've given my working life to the BBC and always felt valued, but in a 10-minute Zoom, I've been made to feel completely worthless and irrelevant. I was called a short time before I was on air and expected to continue as normal. I was in pieces. And finally, a senior manager said to one old hand, and I quote, we'll let you know after Easter if you still have a job, so you have a week to find Jesus. And then laughed. And there are plenty more of these too. Rejection letters from BBC HR haven't even bothered to complete the contact details in there. You should follow Nicky Horn for more. He's on Twitter as Nicky Horn, of all things. Now, the announcements of great people leaving are all over the BBC. Anna King after 37 years, Jonathan Cowap after 34 years, David Burns after more than 20 years, almost the entire BBC Radio Bristol lineup, David Fitzgerald at BBC Radio Devon, who was told he was made redundant, then told to go on air as if nothing had happened, suffered a heart issue on air and had to be rushed to hospital. Carl Wheatley blogged about what he's heard at his former local radio station. Private Eye has written at least one column about it. Meanwhile, BBC Local Radio journalists are to go on strike again in June. There is no good way to achieve this number of cuts, but this is no way for any employer to behave. Shame on them. Elsewhere, I linked to a story about ad-supported music streaming, which doesn't look like a great business, and quite a few people are now pulling out of it altogether. And Rise audio sound ecosystem research is now available in English and available to download. You'll find a link to that as well in my show notes and in my newsletter at james.crid.land. Thank you to Richard Hilton and to James Masterton, as well as Brunn Audio Consulting, Soma FM and Media Realms radio websites for your ongoing support of this podcast and newsletter. If you would like to support my work in any way, you can buy me a coffee, become a member to give me regular coffee. That would be nice. And it works now after breaking it. Or you can give a one-off coffee or five. You can do that at buymeacoffee.com/James Cridland. Now, I am at the Podcast Show 2023 in London next week, and Radio Days North America in Toronto in early June. And I'm free before and after the podcast show in London. If you want to catch up for beers and things, my contact details, very easy, james@crid.land is where to find me. You can also search for me on Mastodon, james@crid.land, and you'll find me on the Brisbane instance that I'm currently using. It would be lovely to have you follow me on Mastodon. Thank you very much. And my professional website has more detail about who I am and what I do and whether I can help you further. You will find that at james.cridland.net. And until next time, keep listening.